Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound for November 25th, 2024. Vic Morren, along with Neil Smith, and our special guest today will be the general manager of the Dallas Stars, Jim Nill. But first, 3 things you need to pay attention to, and you really need to pay attention to these things, Neil, because when we were talking on short shifts last week and Jim Montgomery was released by the Boston Bruins, we said he wouldn't be out of work long, but we didn't think it would be only 5 days.
I know. This is like the Bruce Boudreau thing where you remember when he got fired and then immediately picked up by somebody. But you know what? With 32 teams, there's only so many guys out there that you know are difference makers, as Doug Armstrong said. And Jim Montgomery's a difference maker. And so you can understand why they jumped to get him. They also had him as assistant coach before. He still has a house in St. Louis. His wife is from St. Louis. So Doug Armstrong made the move. Now, I feel bad for Drew Bannister. I really do. It's tough when you lose a job that early in your head coaching career.
And he had done a very good job taking over for Craig Berube a season ago. He went 30-19-5, but only 9-12-1 this year. And for Montgomery, it's a 5-year contract. So there's a pretty good investment here by Armstrong, who you actually had dinner with on Saturday evening, but there was no sign of what was to come after the game.
No, I would like to say that I convinced him to do this move, but I'd be lying if I said that. I'm not going to lie.
Item number 2, Sidney Crosby becomes the 21st player in NHL history to reach 600 goals. He did it in a loss, but really, truly hats off to one of the legendary players of all time. You know, when he came into the league, he was known primarily for his offense. He worked hard at the defensive part of the game. He worked hard at faceoffs. His work ethic has been impeccable, and really a great honor for a great player amidst a really rough season.
And a player that has a work ethic second to none, as you just talked about. Like Sidney Crosby is a impeccable hockey player. He works at his game. He works at those backhand shots that he scores on. He works at every part of it. All the way through his career, he's been doing this. And, I mean, he's just absolutely one of the greatest players to play in the league, who has absolutely, worked at his craft and done the best he can do.
Olympic gold medalist, Stanley Cup champion 3 times over, great captain, great leader. And it's just a shame that he's having to suffer through the season that the Penguins are going through right now. Number 3, Connor Bedard, goalless in his last 12 games, only 6 assists in his last 16 games, and 5 of those 6 came in 2 games against Anaheim. And I watched him really carefully on Saturday afternoon in their game against Philadelphia. And I noticed a lot of bad habits creeping into his game. He got a couple of good looks, but backhand cutesy passes in bad parts of the ice instead of managing the puck well. You could see teams are gapping up on him, that he doesn't have a lot of room. He doesn't look as fast. He doesn't look as quick. But on the other side of this, he's only 19 with a limited supporting cast.
And it's the sophomore jinx. I mean, we've seen this so many times. Players come into the league. The other teams don't know him. So he gets away with stuff and he does stuff in his rookie season. And then he comes back for his sophomore season and he can't do what he used to do because everybody's focusing in on him. And I think that's the way it is with Bedard this year. They're just like, they know 98's on the ice. Be careful. And I just think it's got to do with that. I'll bet you anything that next season will be a really good season for him because he will adjust to the amount of scrutiny he's getting from the other teams.
And he is certainly willing to put in the work, much as Sidney Crosby did. And so if there's anybody whose footsteps he wants to follow, it's Sid the Kid.
Oh, you couldn't follow any better. Well, it's a great pleasure to bring on to NHL Wraparound the general manager of the Dallas Stars, and I can say a very longtime friend. We go all the way back to the Detroit Red Wings in the 80s when Jim was a player and I was a scout. And even before that, before we knew each other, I was up in the Chicago Stadium press box watching him head-to-head with the Chicago Blackhawks. So, Jim, thanks for doing this. This is really an honor to have you on here.
Yeah, Neil and Vic, thank you. It's an honor for me to be on here. Like as you mentioned, we go way back, and we start aging ourselves a little bit when you start talking about the 1980s and that. But it's all good. We've had the game's been great to us, and so many great people in the game. So it's a pleasure to be on the show.
And Jim, you've had such a good off-ice career, from Detroit with Kenny Hall, and now what you've done in Dallas with Jimmy Lights. And I know there was a connection there from back in the Detroit days for me too, with the Jimmy Lights and the Illiches and so on. You've really done such a good job in Dallas. Start with, you guys are having a good year again. You're a contender. I see this league now as, you've got the real teams, the teams like yours and a few others. And you've got the teams that are, definite playoff teams. And then you've got teams that are bubble teams or playoff contending only. And then you've got the bottom feeders that are definitely going to be fighting for the number one overall pick. And I wonder how you see that changing from the old days, from our days, meaning when I was GM in the 90s and when you first started, when you were first in management to today, it's a lot different.
Yeah, the cap system has really changed things, and you've got teams that are when you go into a rebuild, you're into a hard rebuild, and teams have to make those decisions depending on where they're at. And then you got the teams that are trying to make that next step, and it's not easy. You go way back to the 80s, and it would have been 16 and 20 teams. So a first round pick back in the 80s, at the bottom of the first round was a 16th pick. Well, now the bottom of the first round is a 34th pick type of thing. So it's really changed. You got the scouting background. That's how you and I both came up that way. And it's really changed the building part of the team that way because, you've got 7 picks max, and, unless you've made some trades here or there, but, usually you got 5 to 7 picks, and your first round picks somewhere from 20 to 30. And that used to be a low first round pick. So now your second round pick really becomes a third or fourth round pick. So it's really changed the dynamics. We were talking with our staff the other day of, can you tank nowadays? Can you, if that's the word, tanking is kind of the word, but it's hard to do because through the draft, it's, as you know, there's certain timing. Sometimes there's a year when you got Sidney Crosby, the first overall pick, and other years it's just a good player. And, so it's a tough business and tough to build. And we've been fortunate. We were starting to get to that point, about 4 years ago where what the direction our team was going to go. And, we're fortunate. Our scouting staff did a great job. Joe McTonnell and his amateur staff. We started drafting, Mira Heiskanen, the Jake Ottingers, Jason Robertson, Ruby Hentz, Wyatt Johnson, Logan Stankoven, and it changed our direction. It's amazing how quick it turned it for us.
You speak about rebuild and that, and it's such this because at both ends it can become so complicated. And I'll just get your thoughts on what I mean by that. You've got Stan Bowman and the Edmonton Oilers. and it used to be Stan Bowman in the Chicago Blackhawks, was in the same situation. He had these megastars in Toews and Kane in Chicago at that time. Now he's got Draisaitl and McDavid in Edmonton. He's already used $14 million of the cap for Draisaitl starting next season. So they're going to have to use that or more, probably more, for McDavid. So you're talking about $30 million of a $90 million cap if you're lucky. So 1/3 is going to go to 2 players. So that's a dilemma, I would think, end of the spectrum. And then down at the other end of the spectrum where you've got the Chicago Blackhawks or the San Jose Sharks, who are trying to figure out a way to become the Dallas Stars someday, to try to become a contender. And they've got in San Jose Celebrini and Smith, but they're going to have to wait a long time on them. And then they don't know how good do they want to be this season because they want to get another Celebrini or another Smith so that they can have a start to this thing. It just blows my mind how complicated it is at those extremes, at those extremes of things. And I mentioned Stan Bowman only because he's been put in this situation twice now. And I wonder what thoughts are on that, Jim.
Yeah, no, it is. It is a dilemma, and the other part of it is we are a business too. And, when I came to Dallas, and you've been in Dallas and the San Jose's and these places, it's not easy. They're not traditional hockey markets. And, I know I'm going to speak for my own. I don't want to speak for the other teams, but I know our own market. We can't go into a tank. If we go into a rebuild, I guess, let's say a rebuild, I want to be professional about it. To go into a rebuild in Dallas, the rink's can be half empty. And it just, business wise, it doesn't work. So it's a real balancing act, trying to balance that, how do you get better? How do you stay better? How far can you slip in the standings before you got to make, different changes? And so it is a balancing act. You've been in that chair, and it's not easy to turn the corner. It's not an easy, a lot of things have to go right. And, sometimes you don't make moves that you wanted to make. And sometimes you're happy you didn't do them. And that the cap really does come into play, in all these situations.
Jim, we talk a lot about balance on NHL Wraparound through various teams that we look at throughout the league. And age-wise, you guys are right in the middle of the pack. Your roster composition is very interesting in terms of the mix between veterans and young players. Joe Pavelski retired last year, but Logan Sankoven is second in the league in rookie scoring. And you're also getting mileage from young centers like Oscar Bach and Maverick Bork. Matt Duchene doing a terrific job goal scoring this year. Mason Marchman has had a strong season. Tyler Seguin has been strong. And you're doing a lot without a lot of contribution to this point from Jason Robertson and Wyatt Johnston in the goal scoring department.
Yeah, no, I'll put my GM hat on. We're never happy. I'm happy where we're at in our standings, but we haven't played great. You mentioned, Robertson, Hintz, Wyatt Johnson, Miro Heiskanen. That's our main core of our team, and a little bit different age groups, all of them, but they're a big part of our core. And they've really got off to slow starts. And it's a credit to our coaching staff and to our depth. The Matt Duchene's, Tyler Seguin, Mason Marchman, they've really carried our team. They've been strong. And then we're fortunate. Jake Ottinger and DeSmith and Net have been outstanding. They've been good. So they've kept us in the games, but we really haven't put it together as a full team of 4 lines rolling and going along. So it's, like I said, I'm not going to complain. Our record's pretty good, but I know there's a lot more to give, and that's kind of where we got to get to.
Do you feel the club has been a little bit too goaltending dependent because your goals against average is at the top of the NHL right now, and team is tied for 4th, being Ottinger and DeSmith in save percentage. So do you want to see a little bit less dependency on your 2 netminders?
Not really. I believe you have to be good defensively. We are a stingy team. We're no fun. We're hard to. We don't give up a lot of goals as a group. And I'm going to go back a few years. I'm going to give a little bit of credit here to Ken Hitchcock. He came in when I would have been about 2016, 17, brought him in, and he really changed the mentality of a lot of the players. Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, who were leading scorers back then. He changed their game. He made them understand, I always go back to the most important thing I try to get across to players is the most important thing is the 2 points if you win the game and not the points you get in the game personally and stuff. And he really kind of changed that mentality of our team where it's about getting the win. And how do you get that win? Yes, you might give up a few goals, a few points, but you're going to have more success in the end. And that's kind of where our team's at. We're pretty fortunate that way. So we are, we got a great goalie, really good goalies. So I'm happy, but we do play pretty stingy, and it really hasn't affected our goal scoring capability. We still can score, especially when I mention those guys that aren't scoring. Once they get going, I think we'll be pretty lethal.
Jim, you mentioned coaching. The breaking news that happened in the last day or so. Jim Montgomery back in the league again, having been let go by Boston just about a week ago, and that now has been hired by the St. Louis Blues to replace Drew Bannister. And I know you know Jim Montgomery. I know Jim Montgomery. Vic knows Jim Montgomery. We all like him as a person. Our thoughts are on that. Just on the coaches nowadays. If you're a good coach, you don't sit for very long. I mean, we see it now. There are 32 teams again. George McPhee said to me one time when they let Jerry Gallant go, our friend Jerry Gallant, and I know very well from your playing days and my days in Detroit. And he said that, they actually, they were hiring at that time coach Pete DeBoer to go into because they felt that Pete DeBoer was that much for their team at that time than Jerry Gallant. And so how that didn't happen in the old days like that. Like you didn't think, oh boy, there's a coach out there. I better get rid of my guy and bring this guy in.
Yeah, no, it's changed a little bit. And the coaching is such a big part of your game. It always has been, but it's really magnified now. You've got a little bit of different generation of players, a lot of pressure by everybody to win. We are in this cap system where everything's equal. And, we go back to the 80s. We were fortunate to be in Detroit where Mike Ilitch, he would spend $85 million and everybody else was spending $60 million. You can't do that nowadays. And so coaching is so important. And because of the cap, I think our teams have all got younger and there's a lot more teaching that goes on. So it's such a big part of the game. And it's, as you mentioned, it's hard to find experienced coaches. Everybody, you hear the fans out there say, well, let's bring some new blood in. It's not that easy. It is coaching. I don't care if it's the NHL, NFL, NBA. It is a tough job. You're talking about athletes. They're all elite athletes. They've been groomed since they're 15, 16. They're wired. They had expectations, and these coaches got to bring these guys together to play as a team. And it's a tough job, tough job, and the expectations to win every night. And it's not easy.
Jim, I want to go back to your team. And last two seasons, the Western champions had to go through the Dallas Stars, being Vegas and Edmonton. And maybe there's a Winnipeg this year that is the top team. Maybe there's Vegas. Maybe there's Vancouver. But the past two springs, where do you see yourselves needing to get to in order to return to the final like you did in the bubble in 2020?
We brought it, I talked about kind of a little bit of a turnover in our team. We lost Joe Pavelski. And Joe Pavelski's a big, and not only just on the ice, we're talking 30 plus goals, but in the dressing room, was such a big part of the team. But father time, you have to move on sometimes. And we've done that. We still got great leadership, but that's a big void in our room. So we brought these young kids in. So really, where are these young kids going to be at once we get to February, March and that? Have they taken that next step? Does Jason Robertson take the next step of leadership? Does Rupe Hintz? Does Wyatt Johnson? It goes down, Miro Heiskanen and on and on. I want to see where we're at. What's our next step? And what from there we'll know either because of injuries or taking the next step or not taking the next step. What do I need to add? But it's going to be a gauntlet. I just look at our own division. We got Minnesota is a real deal. They're playing good hockey. Winnipeg's a real deal. Colorado's starting to get it going now. They're too good of a team. They're going to go on. And then ourselves, that's 4 teams for really 3 spots. And then possibly a wild card. So it's going to be a gauntlet. And, people always say, what's your goal this year? And they're like, well, the goal is always win the cup. But really, you got to get in the playoffs. That's how hard it is. It is hard to get in the playoffs. And so get in the playoffs, get yourself healthy, be playing the right way. And from there, a lot of lucky things got to happen. I tell people, I just had to do a season ticket function the other day, talking to season ticket holders. And at the end of the thing, I asked them a question. I said, you remember last year in the first round, we ended up playing in Las Vegas in the first round. And it was a funny thing how it worked. They had to beat Anaheim and they lost to Anaheim. And then right after that game, LA played Chicago and Chicago was up by 1 goal with 30 seconds to go. Guy shoots the puck over the glass. And LA scores. That puts Vegas down to the bottom wild card spot. Now we're playing the defending champs in the first round. I said, what a way to start. And we lose the first 2 games. So I said to the season ticket holders, do you guys remember the first 2 games? They're like, yeah. I said, we lost the first 2 games at home. So I said, put up your hands. How many thought we were going to win the series after that? Well, half of them did, half they didn't. I said, then we go to Vegas. Game 3, must win, goes to overtime. We win it, luckily, and then we win game 4, come back home. It eventually goes to game 7, and I remember in the game vividly, Marcia Soul came down, hit the post. Wyatt Johnson comes down to our end and scores 1-0. About 4 shifts later, Eichel goes down, has an empty net, and misses it. We go down, score. We end up winning the game 2-1. It's a fine line between winning and losing. It is amazing. That's what people understand. Neil, you won it with the Rangers. Every series, every game, there's a moment that can change it either way. And all everybody remembers is the team that won, and the team that lost is terrible. And it's like, well, maybe they're not that bad. And of course, what happens, Neil, you sat in that seat. Now ownership wants to make changes. Fans want to make changes. You were 1 post or 1 bounce from maybe winning the cup. And that's the fine line. And that's where you got to sit back and take a little breather and analyze things and say, hey, let's slow it down here. It's not the end of the world either. But because of the world we live in nowadays and in the business we're in, it's like you got to blow it up. But that's the fine line. When I talk to season ticket holders, they kind of forgot about that first round. We could have been done the first round. Maybe I'm not sitting on the show today. You don't know.
Yeah,
that's
you don't. You don't know. And Jim, I want to before Vic takes us down in here, I want to go on to I think a really interesting subject for fans, maybe more interesting than for you and me. But you were just talking about it, and I want to talk about. First of all, you're in Dallas, so you don't have the insanity of Toronto, and I've spoken about this year a lot. Insanity that you would fire Sheldon Keefe after point seasons, and because he lost in overtime in Game 7. I you know what? Had I been in that chair of Brendan Shanahan or Brad Traveling, I probably would have done the same thing. And I would have been insane, just like Toronto's insane. And this year, if they go out again in the first round, well, they're going to try to look for another head to put on a post again. Whether it's Brendan Shanahan or Brad Traveling or somebody, they're going to want that again. And so then my point is Sheldon Keefe immediately goes to New Jersey. Good on Tom Fitzgerald. I think that's a great hire. He's a good coach. And you have a coach that's been around the league in Pete DeBoer in many different spots, always done a good job, but not quite good enough to stay a long time. I know that there's a lot of people on the outside and you've heard this too, like, why do they keep recycling? Why do they keep on, why do they go back to the same guys over and over again? And I'll say, well, how about if we just toss Bruce Cassidy out of Boston and Vegas didn't hire him? Vegas maybe just doesn't win the Stanley Cup the first year he's there. And how about if, Pete DeBoer's not in Dallas? Dallas isn't as good as they are right now. So what that he was already in San Jose and other places? And can you speak like just the fact that we as managers, or you, I'm not one, but I used to be one, we do end up hiring the known commodity because we the right fit for the group of players that we have today. And tell me about that. Like when you go to hire Pete DeBoer, he's been other places and it hasn't worked for whatever reason, but you still go and hire him. And what's the thought process like to do that?
I'm a big resume guy. It's the NHL, I'm going to talk about both sides of my mouth here. I'm talking about developing some young players and all this. The NHL is not a place where you develop. Development takes place in the American Hockey League and junior and all that. When you get to the NHL, yes, there's some development, but it's about winning. The bottom line is winning. And that's where I'm a big resume guy. I was fortunate with Pete's situation. I knew Pete going way back to my days in Detroit. He was coaching in Plymouth. He was coaching in Kitchener in OHL. You've been in that scouting circles, Neil. Got to know him, Steve Spott, a lot. They did a great job there. And then I watched his career. He goes from there to Florida. Doesn't have success there. Florida was a mess back then and doesn't have success, but getting his feet wet. All of a sudden he goes to New Jersey, has success there, takes them to the finals. And was there for 2-3 years. And who knows what happens. But then he goes on to San Jose, has success there, takes them to the finals, goes to Vegas, and they go to the third round, I think, twice with him. So he's got a winning pedigree. And everybody says, well, he hasn't won it. It's hard to win it. It is so hard to win the Stanley Cup. We talk about, things that got to go right in that. But he's got a winning pedigree. I knew him personally, which helps. I know his great things. I know his faults. But I just know he's a good coach. He's had success. It's a little bit what our team needed. I talked about our defense. We were very good defensively under Hitch. We did have to open it up a little bit. I thought we had a little bit more offensive talent there. And Pete's always brought that out of teams. His teams have always scored well. So I knew that. And, but in the end, it's a gut feeling, Neil. You've been there. But I'm a big, I think the fans out there need to understand it is a tough job coaching 23 to 25 players that are high strung, all want ice time, all want to do it a certain way, maybe aren't quite ready for the NHL yet, but they're getting there and you got to deal with that. And, it's a tough job and it's 24 hours. I'm after a game, I go down there, see the coaches and they're sitting there, they're whacked out. They've given everything they've got. They get on that bus, get on the team plane. They're whacked out. They've got their laptops open. They're working on pre-scouting the next game. It's 24 hours a day during the NHL season, and they grind it out, and it's a tough job.
Jim, before we let you go, you've done such a great job in this discussion with us, just really illuminating so many different sides of the GM job. But want to now take you back to your days as a player. And of course, 1982 is a pretty special year for you. I was in college at the time, and you were playing for the Vancouver Canucks. That was one of 5 clubs that you played for during the course of your NHL career. And the Canucks had never won a playoff series until 1982, which was their 12th season in the NHL. And they never had an overtime goal in the playoffs until then. And probably your most memorable goal, and I went back and I looked at the video and I remembered it, looking at it just as when I had seen it the first time. Double overtime, game 1 against Chicago in what was then the Clarence Campbell final, a rebound against Tony Esposito, a Hall of Famer. But your team scored 3 overtime goals that year. You had 1 in each series. The first one was against the Flames. The second one was against the Kings, and then yours against the Blackhawks. Do you know who got the other 2?
Yeah, I do. Yep. I was just at his induction. Colin Campbell, he scored 3 goals, I think, that whole year, and 3 of them were overtime. Two in the regular season, one in the playoffs, and then the other one was Tiger Williams.
That's right.
I believe Tiger was the other one. Yeah.
Do you remember the celebration?
Oh yeah. I remember the celebration. Well, I remember the goal. It was an end-ender. Like, we're sitting around the fire here, right? Telling stories. So it's an end-to-end rush. I went through about 8 guys and stuff, but no, it was. I came off the bench. Harold snaps. The puck came around to Harold snaps. I was on a change, coming down the slot, so their people didn't see me coming in underneath everybody. Tony made the save. It came on the slot, and I, of course, put it top shelf. But it was. But I remember, but you know, you talk about that series. We just snuck into the playoffs that year. Roger Nilsson's our coach. Roger was a great coach, and he was ahead of his time. We talked, he got the nickname Captain Video. He's the one. He was ahead of his time. It was amazing what he did and how he had us prepared. But we snuck in there, beat Calgary, and that was a battle. That was a war. They had a big, heavy team. That was the Willie Pletz and these guys. It was a war. But that's the year that Edmonton lost to LA. We talk about things have to happen. I think Edmonton was a best of 5 back then. I think Edmonton was up 2-0, and they lost 3 straight to LA. And LA had just snuck in the playoffs like us. So all of a sudden, the Stanley Cup contending team, it was really Edmonton and the Islanders were the Edmonton out west and the Islanders that Neil knows all about out east. And those are the two. Now all of a sudden Edmonton's out. And now that opened up the whole thing. We played LA, beat them. Chicago, I can't remember who they played. We played Chicago, went to the finals. I still remember everybody was so surprised we're going to the finals. We had to go right from the Chicago series to Long Island to play the games. We didn't think we were going to be there. Didn't reserve any hotel rooms. So we couldn't get any hotels anywhere. So we're staying at a motel out on Long Island somewhere because we didn't think we were going there. The people would have thought, oh, who's going here? Back then it wasn't quite as organized as we are nowadays in that, but I still remember we're staying at some motel out on the beach on Long Island and stuff because we weren't supposed to be there, but we did it. And it was a great bunch of guys.
Great memory.
Jim, before you run on us, you've had such a great, and I've always said, people they don't know this, but I'll say to them, I know, I won the cup in New York and it's a big deal in New York. Obviously, when you win anything in New York, it's huge, right? But I said, we all wanted to be a player. I said, and you find another way to be in the NHL. For me, it was through being a scout. I was thrilled to be a scout and then just ecstatic to be able to be a little piece of the Islanders back in their cup days. But that was all because I really, in my heart, and still to this day, I would have loved to have just played one shift in the NHL, just one shift. Had a great playing, not a superstar, but you had a great playing career. And then you've gone on to have a great management career, both in Detroit and now in Dallas. I just want you to tell me, what's your best memory of that long career? What's your number one thing that you would point to and say?
Boy. Yeah, well, I've been so blessed. Neil, as you know, you and I, the game's been so good to us and so many great people. And probably one of my biggest things, I got to play in the 1980 Olympics for the country. Making the NHL is big, yes, but to be able to play in the Olympics for your country. So I played for Team Canada in the Olympics. That's the year that 1980 US won it. And, it was a great experience. Just, played against Fetisov, Larionov, Makarov, all these guys, Tretiak and Nets, it was unreal. And just to play for your country and that. And I always tell the story, get long-winded here telling stories. In 1980, I was on the Canadian team, the US won, and I tell people that really changed hockey in the US. That's the Cold War days. Hockey wasn't big in the US. There was no Dallases, no Anaheims, none of these teams. All of a sudden, these college kids, I was on the Canadian side, college kid, but the U.S. guys, we played against, I'm good friends with all those guys. And they ended up winning it. And that changed the NHL. That changed hockey in the U.S. Without them winning that, I think if you remember, the U.S. played the U.S. team played the Russians a preliminary game on Madison Square Garden. I think that beat about 10-1. And everybody said, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. And you're in this little town of Lake Placid, probably the last of the small town Olympics. I don't think there'll be any more Lake Placid, not in today's Olympic, the way it's a business now. But small town Lake Placid, here's these college kids win the gold medal. And that really put hockey in the map. We're probably not hearing this podcast right now if it wasn't for that defining moment, because that was a Cold War day. Russia-US was in a Cold War battle, government-wise, politically-wise. Hockey was big, but it wasn't big down in the South. All of a sudden, you got people in Georgia and Alabama watching these young kids, college kids, beat the Russians in the Olympics. And I really think that's a defining moment for hockey where it's at now. That really kind of got America, the U.S. into the hockey world and stuff. And, all of a sudden now Gretzky goes down to LA. That makes it boom. And here we are today. We got hockey in Dallas. Seth Jones, Popeye Jones's son, who was a basketball player, and his son ended up playing hockey in Dallas. And these more and more of these stories. And I really think that 1980 had a lot to do with that.
I totally agree with you, and I know Vic does too. And the fact we had Billy Guerin on here just a couple of weeks ago, which was really fun, just like this is. And I actually said to him during that time, I said, it's because of people like you, Bill, that we've got a 32-team league, because you as an American player came in, you played so well for New Jersey, and kids were inspired. And now you have an Auston Matthews who grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona, for goodness sakes. You got Jason Zucker is from Vegas. I got to know Jason a little bit in the summers, and you get players coming from all over the place. Somebody told me I was at the Islander game last night, and somebody told me that the number 1 overall pick coming up, Long Island kid, at least in their mind. And I'm not sure, because I'm not on top of the amateurs like you would be, but, and you have so many good Long Island kids that are in the league, Charlie McAvoy and Adam Fox, and you can go on and on. There was no Long Island kids when I was with the Islanders. Nobody played hockey on Long Island. And that's all because of what you said, the miracle, 1980 miracle. And that started to develop a lot of players. Kids like Pat LaFontaine, Mike Modano, the early pioneers that were great American players that ended up in the league. And so we're blessed to have the United States have, suddenly now has embraced hockey. Jim, you and I are Canadians, and the only place that embraced hockey was Russia and Canada in the old days. I mean, you're getting some Swedes, some Finns, some Czechs, but mostly just Canada, and then Russia coming in. But listen, I could go on all day with this thing, because right? We get together, we don't stop.
I love talking hockey. It's just great. I love this. It's just the best. And I was a good friend of yours, Jimmy Diaz, with him last night in Tampa Bay. He comes to all the games and stuff. And he said, say hello to you and that. But, he's telling his stories and that. And I just love sitting around and hearing all these old stories and things that took place behind the scenes that people don't realize that take place.
Yeah, he is comical too. The way he tells stories is comical. There's nobody who tells stories like Jimmy D has a way of telling stories that makes everybody laugh. But one of the things, and I know I said I was going to let you go, but I got to blurt this out. When we have the reunions with the 30th for the 30 years of the Rangers Stanley Cup, the team will get together. And there's nothing better than to get together with those guys. It's so much fun. But what I enjoy the most, Jim, having been the manager, is telling the player and his wife how exactly he got to the Rangers, because most of them don't know, and tell them the full story of the phone call I got. For example, I'm sitting in Glens Falls, New York, and Pierre Paget, the general manager of Quebec Nordiques, calls me and says, would you trade Mike Hurlbut? And I go, yes, I would. And he says, I said, what do you want? He says, we need a guy on the power point. And he says, what would you want? I don't know. Send me a list of guys that you would be prepared to trade for him. So he sends me this list. I swear, Jimmy, we're in training camp. And I take the list, and I don't know some of the names I don't know. Some I know are not really worthy. And so I send the list to Krister Rockstrom, who Krister Rockstrom, and he's in Europe. And I said, Krister, here's this list. He calls me and he says, take this defenseman here, Karpatsev. And I said, okay, how do you say that again? How do you say that? Yeah. Karpatsev. Yeah. And so
what position does he play?
Yeah. So I call Pierre Paget and I go, we'll take this kid, Alexander Karpatsev. It's Russians. We didn't know how to pronounce the names. So we get the rights to Karpatsev and he comes immediately to training camp. He falls in my lap. He's on our next defenseman right on the team in the Stanley Cup season. And so I unfortunately he's no longer with us because of the plane crash. But I got to tell his widow that story and his daughter. And there's so many stories, as you know, there's a story for every guy that you have on the team. But that part I really enjoy telling them, this is how you ended up there and how got to be at times, right, Jim? I've always said, like, to win a championship, you good at what you do and understand how to put a team together, but you also got to get lucky. You got to have guys fall in your lap because somebody either made a mistake or else you happen to turn over a rock that nobody else had turned over. Isn't it amazing the way that things have to go?
Well, and what you mentioned, Krister Rockstrom. I believe you hire good people and they make you look good. We manage them. And, look at the people you had under you when you won and stuff. The people that we have that support us and do the groundwork over in Europe and at a college game in the US and a high school game somewhere else, going to a junior game. The people behind the scenes that do the work for us are unbelievable. And they don't get enough credit because, we're the ones that are up on stage all the time and either getting credit or getting beat up either way, whichever things happen. But the staffs that we put together are so important for your success. And I know you've been fortunate that way. I've been fortunate too. I got great people underneath me and they're really the ones that make it work. And we're there just to kind of guide them and direct them in that.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. Thanks, Jim, for doing this and good luck. Continued good luck. We'll be watching the Stars and seeing what's going to unfold this season. But, you already deserve congratulations to be in the position you're in with the Dallas Stars in that you're a contender. And I don't think people understand how lucky you are in the cities that have a contender, how lucky you are just to have a contender. I mean, you all want to win the cup, but I mean, there's about 25, 26 cities that would love to be, sniffing at being a contender, and Dallas has one. So congratulations to getting them to this point, and hopefully you can get them all the way.
Yeah, well, thank you once again. Thank you for having me on your show. And like I said, it was great speaking with both of you.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Jim. And such a privilege to have Jim Nill on with us for a really in-depth interview. And a quick reminder that our website is NHLWraparound.com. And Neil and I will be back with you on Wednesday with short shifts. And before we move on, Neil, I know you know Jim Nill for so many years and a real gentleman and a terrific thrill to have him on with us today.
And what a humble guy he is, right? A guy that played for Vancouver in 1982 and went to the Stanley Cup final against the Islanders and then played for Detroit for many years and then, kept up with his NHL career, moved into management, worked for the Red Wings, ended up getting the chance to be GM of Dallas Stars and doing a remarkable job there, but still staying so humble. He's still like the guy that I met way back when he signed with the Red Wings. So it's really fun to have these guys on and to be able to talk about the old days and not, have stressed out guys. It really is a lot of fun for me.
And I think he was pretty happy when we had our discussion with him because his Stars have won 5 out of their last 6 and they will be at Carolina on Monday to see if they can keep their winning ways going. So some items of intrigue over the weekend. On Friday, Sidney Crosby fought with Kyle Connor of the Winnipeg Jets in the Jets win at Pittsburgh. And the first thing that it reminded me of was Wayne Gretzky's fight with Neil Broughton in 1982. There was a little bit of shoving and then not too many punches thrown. And it was just more like, wow, did you see that? That's something I didn't think that I was going to see. Now, this was Sid's 9th fight in his career, and it was Connor's first. And by the way, Kyle Connor in that game had the Gordie Howe hat trick, a goal and an assist in that 4-1 win.
Yeah. And Kyle Connor is a Lady Byng winner. And so, you know, you could see the frustration in Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins by that. I mean, Sidney Crosby doesn't want to fight. Like, he shouldn't have to fight. There's no reason for him to fight anybody. But he's so frustrated with the Penguins and the way they're going that it's just like he got that reverse hit from Kyle Connor, and he went nuts and decided he wanted to fight. But that's not him. It's out of character for him. So it just shows you how frustrating it is right now for the Penguins.
Certainly is. And do you remember the Gretzky fight, though?
Oh, very well.
That fight with Broughton?
Oh,
the
very
grainy
well.
footage?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very well.
And I think Wayne's still waiting to throw his first punch also in that.
I'm sure.
All right. Well, while we're on the subject of Gordie Howe hat tricks, a little bit of trivia, and we'll give the answer later on. So this comes in 2 parts. How many hat tricks, Gordie Howe hat tricks, did Gordie Howe actually have in his career? That's part 1. And part 2, which player has the most Gordie Howe hat tricks? So little something to chew on for the next few minutes until we get to the answers. And moving forward here, on Sunday evening, William and Alex Nylander played together for the first time for the Toronto Maple Leafs in their 3-2 win over Utah. And it's the first time that they have played together since 2016 in the World Junior Championships. And that roster spot for Alex was opened up when Nyes was unable to play after taking that hit from Zach Whitecloud last week. So good on them in playing together for the first time. William had a goal and an assist, and Alex was a +1. Also, Neil, let's take a look at the Colorado Avalanche, a 7-4 win in Florida. And Colorado is in the midst of playing 10 out of 12 on the road, but they're 3-0 on this current road trip, which continues Monday in Tampa. But the bigger news here, Jonathan Drouin had a pair of goals, his first 2 of the season, 2 goals by defensemen, not named Makar. Nikushkin scored his first goal. So the Panthers have lost 5 of 6, but here come the Avs. Players are getting well. Contributions coming from a lot of places.
Well, Jim Nill said in our interview with him earlier, here comes Colorado. He said it. I think it's the general manager of Dallas. And we all know Colorado's too good to stay where they are. A year ago, we knew Edmonton was too good to stay where they were. And this year, Colorado's too good to stay where they are. So they're coming, and watch out, because they got a pretty good team when you got McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, Nikushkin, and they're coming hard.
They are. I'll tell you else who's coming hard. How about the Columbus Blue Jackets? This has got to be the feel-good story of the year. They are NHL 500 through the first 20 games. They have a 3-game win streak, beating 3 playoff clubs from last year, Boston, Tampa Bay, Carolina, and Saturday evening, Kirill Marchenko ties the game with just over a minute left, and then they win in a shootout. And, you know, we've talked about it already, and this is always a story worth repeating as long as they continue their winning ways, that it is so great that that franchise has something to cheer about so far this season.
And I don't know anybody who could cheer against Columbus. I mean, you've got to want Columbus to do well. They've had so many heartbreaking stories there. So I'm really happy for them. I'm happy for Sean Monahan, who's having a great start to the season. And every time I see Columbus, winning or getting close or going over, I'm so happy for them, because there's so much despair around that franchise. And so to see them have this start is great.
So we just mentioned the quarter pole, and I know from speaking with you over the years that there's a stat that you really pay attention to as somewhat of a benchmark as to whether or not teams are going to make the playoffs. And it's not 100% certainty, but odds are pretty much in favor that if you're on the plus side of this stat, chances are you're making it. And if you're on the minus side, you're not. So share what you got.
Well, here's what we got. Like if you go back to November 23rd of 2023, just about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, you got the plus teams all make it. The minus teams all miss, with these exceptions. Tampa Bay was -2 at that point, and they made the playoffs. Detroit Red Wings were +8, and they missed the playoffs. Philadelphia Flyers were +7. They missed the playoffs. The New York Islanders were -9 on November 23rd, 2023, and they made the playoffs. The Pittsburgh Penguins were +11 on November 23rd, 2023, and missed the playoffs. And then in the West, the Nashville Predators, who unfortunately this year are the reverse, but last year were -3 at this time and ended up making the playoffs. But that's it. Like, those are the only anomalies. If the other guys, if you're a plus, you made it. If you're a minus, you missed at this point in the season, which is phenomenal. So if you look at this year, it's amazing. Like, let's talk about a team that's a minus that we wouldn't like. Boston Bruins is -21. -21. How are they going to get to be a plus to make the playoffs? I don't know. And that's one of the best examples, maybe the best example of all of them. My point is that if on the goal differential, you've got to watch it. If you're a big minus, you don't have much time left to make it up to be a plus. Even though you've got a lot of season left, it's really hard to get back to the plus category.
But certainly the Washington Capitals really defied odds a year ago, making the playoffs. And what were they, like -37 or 38?
No, the Washington Capitals, believe it or not, right now, last season, were even at this point last season. Even.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So they weren't a big minus team. They were just, now this season, the Washington Capitals I have to use November 20th to equal out the amount of games played. But the Washington Capitals on November 20th, a few days ago, were +28. +28. You're not missing the playoffs if on November 20th, you're +28.
But the remarkable thing was that I was referring to was just last year, that they were so deep in the minus, and it was like historic that they made it. So it just goes to show that there are outliers here.
For sure. There's anomalies for sure. But for 90% of it, if you're a plus team, you make it. If you're a minus team, you miss.
Yep, for sure. So I want to move on to something else here, because I think in the first quarter of the season, we have seen certain teams that have kind of altered their play from what we're used to seeing, for better or for worse. And it doesn't mean that it's going to hold up for the entire season, but that there are some characteristics that we've seen that are a little bit different. So let's look on the good side first. Winnipeg, Minnesota, and I think now Toronto has really started to buy into Craig Berube. They are 7-1 without Auston Matthews. They're getting great contribution in his absence from Nylander, from Mitch Marner, from John Tavares. But there seems to be also a buy-in to play away from the puck as well. And there's a lot of commitment there. So you can really see that there's a little something different in the water in Toronto.
We had Doug Armstrong on here, a while back, and I asked him, you remember this well, but I said to him, how's Craig Berube going to do with a star-studded cast rather than a lunch bucket cast that you had in St. Louis? And he said, it's not about how Craig's going to do. It's about how the players are going to do to adapt to Craig Berube. And the players are adapting to Craig Berube in Toronto. It's going to be interesting when all these guys get back, Matthews and everybody else. Are they going to be able to stay so disciplined and so play such a tight ship as they're playing right now, which is the way that Berube wants them to play? We'll see if they can keep doing that once all these guys get back.
I don't think he's going to let them off the hook. I think he's going to drive them even harder, and that's what they're going to need come playoff time if they're going to shake this drought that has gone back all the way to 1967. A team that has changed, obviously, and not for the better, has been Boston, but let's take a look now that they are 2-0 under Joe Sacco as their head coach, but they still have a ways to go to really getting back to the Bruin teams that we have known from recent years.
And I'm not sure they have the personnel to do that. You know what? I mean, Don Sweeney, as the general manager, may think that they didn't get the results they should be getting with Jim Montgomery, but I don't think they have the personnel to get back there. We'll see. I just don't think they've got a good enough team.
A couple of teams that I have marked as the same, and I'm curious to see what your reaction to this, and that they have not altered their play. One looks better than the other for now, but do either have the goods to make a deep run in the playoffs. One is the Carolina Hurricanes, who game after game after game, they throw dozens of pucks at the net. They are upwards in the 80s, 90s, sometimes in the low hundreds in shots attempted per game. But once you get into the playoffs, the ice becomes smaller and it becomes a little bit more difficult. So what works over 82 games may not work in the postseason. And the other team is the New York Rangers, who once again are showing how goaltending dependent they are. They tend to start very slow in games. And this is a team that likes to play more fancy than gritty. And again, you could have 82 one-offs and it's going to look great. But for either of these teams going to the postseason, I'm seeing the same kind of characteristics that I've seen in years past. And I'm not certain that we're going to see any different result from either club.
No, I agree with you totally. I agree. I don't see any difference from them. They're great regular season teams. And the problem with the National Hockey League is that you have two different seasons. You have the regular season, you have the playoffs, and they're different. Teams can win in a tournament format like the playoffs that win in a marathon format like the regular season. So, we'll see if we can be right on this, if I'm right, or maybe we'll get surprised and one of the teams that we say is only a good marathon team ends up being a good tournament team. I just don't think it's going to happen.
I think we have to see something different other than what we have seen in order for either of those two clubs to have deep postseason runs to make it to the conference final. And obviously the Rangers have 2 out of the past 3 seasons, but even take it to the next level, to the final, and perhaps raising the cup. So some player notes. Kirill Kaprizov missed the shootout loss for the Wild in Calgary Saturday, feeling the effects from the Drake Caggiula hit in Edmonton on Thursday. He had an MRI on Sunday. No serious injury, and he is day today. Meanwhile, in Carolina, Seth Jarvis activated from IR. He missed 7 games. Pyotr Kochetkov, which I keep loving the opportunity to say, he left in overtime against Columbus on Saturday. He was run into by Sean Walker. Yaniv Peretz has been called up as backup for the Carolina Hurricanes. Dylan Sandberg, defenseman for Winnipeg, goes to IR, suffered a broken foot Saturday versus Nashville. Jordan Eberle, the Kraken captain. Pelvic surgery on Friday. He is out at least 3 months. And Cam York returned for Philadelphia on Saturday afternoon. He missed a month. That covered a span of 13 games. So that is the MASH list as we head into Thanksgiving week. So you ready for the trivia answer?
Absolutely.
All right. So part one was the number of Gordie Howe hat tricks that Gordie Howe actually had. And reminder that this is a goal, assist, and a fighting major in the same game. The answer is 2.
Oh, wow.
Just 2. And I'm certain that you would have said much higher than that. And I think
No, for sure.
Yeah. His son Mark had once said that if it was a goal, an assist, and a cross check across the face, it may have been way higher. So,
Right. Well, Gordie was a tough guy to play against. Everybody says that had to play against him. So he was, while he's an iconic, legendary hero of that generation, he was a pit bull. He didn't take any crap, and he gave it back a lot.
He did, but, and I've actually found this today is, do you know how many fights Howe actually had in his career?
No.
22, which is also
Wow.
lower than I thought that he would have had. So some surprising numbers for Mr. Hockey there. The second part of the trivia question was, which player has the most Gordie Howe hat tricks in his career? And it is a retired player. And I'm going to give you a hint. It's an active NHL head coach.
Wow. I can only think of Craig Berube, but I'm sure that's not the answer.
It's Rick Tocchet.
Oh, wow.
With 18. So a little bit of fun and games with Mr. Hockey.
That's
and
great.
Some little bit
stuff.
of reminiscing. Yep. This is the human side of the story. And today, Neil and I are going to talk about a couple of players. One having his jersey retired, one trying to make an NHL comeback. And first, we're going to start with the jersey retirement on Saturday of Joe Thornton, his number 19 going to the rafters, joining teammate Patrick Marleau as the only 2 Sharks ever to have their numbers retired. And just an amazing thing there, Neil, is that these 2 players were drafted 1 and 2 in 1997. And now they have their numbers alone atop the arena in San Jose.
I know. Isn't that amazing, really, that happened, that Boston drafted Thornton and then ended up trading him to the Sharks? And I got to give you a little trivia thing here, too. Joe Thornton is one of only 3 players in the modern era. I don't think it happened in the old era, but I don't want to say that. 3 players who were traded for, and in the same year they were traded for, ended up being MVP of the league for their new team. Do you know who the other 2 were?
I don't.
Well, you should. Number 1, Mark Messier with the Rangers.
Yeah.
Number 2, Joe Thornton with the Sharks.
Yeah.
Number 3, Taylor Hall with the New Jersey Devils.
Got it. Yep.
That's pretty good.
That's
when
great.
you trade for a guy and he ends up being MVP. So, yeah, it's Jumbo Joe and gets his night in San Jose.
He's been called the playmaker of his generation, 24 season, 7th all time in games with 1,714, 7th in assists with 1,109, 14th in points with 1,539. So that means he scored 430 goals during the course of his career. But even his father would say, when Joe would ask him for advice, he would say, shoot the puck. And Joe was such a pass first guy that I'm pretty certain he could have scored 600 goals in his career if he had had more of a shoot first mentality.
Yeah, sort of like Adam Oates, right? Adam Oates was a pass first guy. And those guys, if you're a pass first guy, that's in your DNA. You're not looking to shoot. you're looking to give it, you get your thrill out of giving it to somebody else to score. So, that's the way Joe Thornton was. His passing was unbelievable.
The ceremony itself was really unbelievable. And the big entrance was with Thornton coming through the entranceway at the Shark Tank, and the current Sharks all had the fake beards going, and then he came out through the big shark head, and his family, mom and dad were there. Many Sharks alumni were in attendance, and on the stage with him, Joe Pavelski, Ryan Clough, Douglas Murray, and Patrick Marleau. There were stories, there were nicknames being told, there were tears, and this guy could have done stand-up. That's how amusing and funny and heartfelt this ceremony was. And, this guy certainly isn't shy. And if you remember back in 2017, he did the ESPN body issue with Brent Burns. So, just a larger than life persona. And the more I thought about it, and I watched this yesterday, he almost had like this Bill Walton aura about him.
Yeah. No, but the whole thing with the hat, and everything that he did, it was very special. It was very special. If that was me, I'd be crying the whole time. I mean, he was just he was loving it. He was just enjoying it. But it was really great. It was great to see. And it was very special and good for San Jose to put on such a special event.
One number gets retired, another player trying to hopefully make a comeback. And it's been reported in many publications, NHL.com, TSN, ESPN has done stories on it also, that Jonathan Toews recently spent 5 weeks in India using a 5,000-year-old therapy to help heal his body. It is called Ayurvedic detox, called Panchakarma. And the 3-time captain of the Stanley Cup champion Blackhawks in 2010, 2013, 2015. He's an unrestricted agent at age 36. He hasn't played since April 13th of 2023. He has been suffering with the effects of long COVID and chronic immune response syndrome. He has got nothing to prove. And it just goes to show the dedication and the passion of hockey players to do whatever it takes to get back to play just one more game or one more season.
Well, it's amazing, really. Jonathan Toews, another famous number 19, just like Joe Thornton. And let's hope he can do it because he deserves it. He deserves whatever he wants. So I'm cheering for him.
Ayurveda translates into the knowledge of life and has been the healing science in India, as mentioned, for over 5,000 years. And a Panchakarma is a healing protocol designed to restore health by releasing toxins stored in the body. So it was such an education to read that. And God, I think we can only hope that this works for Toews. He can come back, play for a team of his choosing, and perhaps give us 2 or 3 more great seasons.
Absolutely, for sure.
That's a great note to close on. So once again, we thank Dallas Stars GM Jim Nill for joining us today. Thank you to our listeners. Send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com. Our website is nhlwraparound.com. And Neil and I will be back with you this coming Wednesday, Thanksgiving Eve, for short shifts with more immediate and in-depth coverage from around the NHL. So until then, take care.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.